In today's episode, we're tackling the wiring. As I'm tackling the wiring on this car, it makes sense to start here at the battery. Now the first thing is, I don't like this. It's a Lion. Anybody who knows about Lion batteries know that absolute utter and this battery, to be honest, is no exception. It dies on me every about 24 hours. I keep having to charge it every time I want to move this car. So I really do want to replace this. Now, if I'm going to go to the trouble of replacing this and taking this battery out, there are a few things I can do. For that, however, I'm going to take you to my daily driver Honda Civic for a bit of an explanation. This is the engine bay to my daily drive Honda Civic, and ostensibly underneath, this is the same car as the Rover 400. As you can see, the battery is here at the back behind the bulkhead, and this actually offers us a few advantages. First of all, it's behind the centre line of the axle, so that gives us slightly better weight distribution. I know it's very minor, but I'll take every little advantage I can get. Next, this is a Japanese car style battery and not the Euro style which the Rover has. Where we plan to ship the Rover to, trying to get a Euro style actually might be quite difficult if we need a replacement, so I'd rather opt for this style of battery. Next, the way that this battery is secured. I've noticed this a lot in Japanese cars, but they all seem to use this style of over-the-top strap which hold them down. The current way on the Rover isn't actually compliant with our governing racing body, so I need to swap it to this style. This is compliant. And the final thing is, with the location of the battery being here, it's going to shorten the cable run massively to the kill switch, which we've got to fit. I'll get onto that later. For now, however, let's get on with mounting the battery in the Rover back into this location, and that is going to require some parts. Before making mounts for the new battery, I first of all had to remove the old one, the battery tray it sat on, and the old earth strap. Quick tip if you've never removed the battery from a car before. Always remove the negative or earth strap first, because if you accidentally touch part of the bodywork with your spanner that you're undoing it with, you're not going to cause a short. With it undone, then you can undo the positive lead. I'll also take the chance to say that this episode is a bit of a continuity nightmare. Electrical work had to be done throughout the build of the car, so you will see the car move positions and you might notice things that are missing that you've seen in previous episodes. Don't worry, you aren't going mad. With everything removed, I disconnected the positive cable from the fuse panel, as this is going to require rerouting, which I will show you later on in this episode. With that done, I could finally look at remounting the battery. My plan is to use this, which is the battery tray out of the Nissan Micra donor car that I took the engine from for the Mini. If you haven't seen my Mini build, please click the link up here. The reason I'm using this is basically because I've got it, I've got no use for it, and it is actually the correct size for the battery. It also comes with a nice hold down strap, which again is the correct size for the battery. First thing I've got to do though is take off all these brackets, because that's stopping this dropping into position in the Rover. To remove the brackets, I cracked out the die grinder with a ball tip cutter to grind out the spot welds. With the one bracket removed, it was then just a case of repeating the process for the other two.
The next thing was to make the bracket that would join the battery tray to the chassis rail. This started with taking a piece of white paper and a dirty finger to the chassis rail and making a template of some existing threaded bolt holes. Well, these bolt holes are not used on the Rover, they are actually the ones that, if it were a Civic, would be what the battery tray bolted to. The template made, I traced around it onto some 3mm steel plate that I have used to make loads of other bits for the Rover. With the plate made, I got it bolted to the Rover so I could start designing the rest of the bracket. Due to where the battery mount would bolt to the car, the mount had to be made in two parts, so the next part was to make the plate that the battery tray would bolt to. This started by measuring the positions of some existing bolt holes in the battery tray. With the plate cut out, I clamped it into place on the battery tray so I could mark the position of the holes that needed to be drilled. I had somehow misplaced my auto center punch, so I had to resort to the manual one and a hammer. Again, due to the position of where stuff had to bolt to, accessing any nuts under the battery tray with a spanner would be almost impossible, so I decided to weld the nuts in place. To ensure that they were in the correct place, I bolted the plate to the battery tray using countersunk screws to ensure the nuts ended up central to the holes. On the Civic, not only did the battery tray bolt to the chassis rail, but it also had a mount further up on the back of the strut mount. This bolt hole existed on a Rover, so I needed to replicate this mount on the Micros battery tray. This started by taking a small offcut of box section steel and drilling a hole in it. With the hole drilled, I marked the side of the box section so I could cut the necessary notch required. This would allow me to mate it up to the underside of the battery tray properly, and then it could be welded in place. After the weld had cooled down, I bolted the battery tray in place on the car and then made a cardboard template up for the part that would connect the plate with the captive nuts in it to the plate that would bolt to the Rover's chassis leg. Unfortunately, I missed this on camera, so I'll skip forward a bit to me tracing round it onto some 3mm steel. With the part cut out, I prepped the edges ready so it could be welded to the other part of the battery tray mount. With all the parts joined together, I fitted them to the car and checked that everything lined up. As it did, I moved on to making the last part of the battery tray mount. After a final test fit to ensure everything was fine, I just had to fully weld the bracket together.
It's the next day and these have now cooled down, so I couldn't fit them. However, I've got one last little job, which is to make a replacement one of these because I went and used the other one on my daily drive.
With all the parts made, I could get the battery tray mount installed, followed by the battery tray itself. With the battery tray installed, I clipped the charcoal canister back in place and then refitted the engine bay fuse panel.
Right, the next job is to fit the kill switch. Now this is mandatory and is part of the safety rules. I'm fitting this now before I fit the battery purely because I've got to run some cables and there's a grommet underneath where the battery sits, which will be quite easy to run the cables through. I got this battery out the back of my friend Max's Renault Espace. So first of all, what I'm going to do is strip it out of this takeaway container and the cabling off it, and then make a template for the mounting plate that this is going to go into. Max, if you're watching, oh Betsy, she's a gift that keeps on giving.
With the kill switch released from its previous Tupperware mountings, I cracked out some cardboard to make a template for a steel mount which would hopefully be a bit sturdier. With the template made, I once again traced around it onto some 3mm steel plate that I'd used to make almost every bracket on this build. With the mounting plate made, I fitted a kill switch to it and then could move on to the next step, which was to mount it into the car.
The mounting plate built, we now need to fit this to the car. Now, this car will end up with a roll cage in. We have to have one as per our governing body rules. So ultimately this is going to be mounted off the cage. However, we don't have the cage in at the minute and I do need to wire it up. If you're wondering why we haven't built the cage first, it's basically down to timing and logistics with my other teammates. This part is eventually going to be replaced by part of the cage, and so probably with this bracket. So for the time being, I'm going to mark the position of this and then go tack weld it to it. I could just tack weld it in the car, but trying to get my welder here is a bit difficult, so I'm going to unbolt this and do it on the bench.
As I said at the beginning of this episode, this one is a bit of a continuity nightmare. Had I known the issues I was going to have with a particular teammate and getting the roll cage built, which I ultimately had to do myself, I would have just built the cage first and then figured out the kill switch wiring afterwards. To back out of the car I did as I said and tack welded the kill switch mounting plate to it. I only tack welded it as I knew I would be cutting it off at a later date. With the kill switch mounting plate welded to the bracket, I fitted it into the car and then could look at how to wire it up. In order to wire the kill switch to the battery, I needed a battery in place, so with it now charged, I refitted it, making sure it's securely fastened down as per the rulebook. It also helps if you put the battery in the correct way around.
Okay, the first cable I'm going to worry about is the ground. Now, the ground that's in here is not quite long enough to reach back to the battery, and then from the battery to the bodywork. On my Civic, the ground is in that bolt hole there, which fortunately still exists on the Rover, so we can utilize it. So I'm going to take this out, figure out the length I need, and make myself up a new battery cable. Now fortunately this black cable already came with the correct crimp on the end of it, so I'm going to leave that in place. So I'll bolt it back in and then see how much, if anything, I really need to shorten this by. I don't think it's going to be a lot, if I'm honest. Change of plan, I've just found this battery cable. I'm not sure what it's off, but it's already got the battery terminal on the end, which is crimped on, so this isn't, well, less chance basically of stuff going to rattle loose. Terminal there is correct. The only thing is it's got this intermediate one. What I can do is cut that, put a piece of heat shrink over it and insulate that, and this will be perfectly good, because this is actually one continuous cable. It's just got the sheathing strip back there.
But once I broke out the heat gun rather than just a lighter, but then this heat shrink was a bit larger than the normal stuff that I typically use. With that tab removed and the heat shrink applied to the bare cable, I got it fitted to the car.
now I've got the earth cable from the basically engine casing to the battery, which is how it ran before, and now I need to go from this to the bodywork. I've got a nice earth point there, so what I've got to do is make up a cable.
Once again, the leftover wiring from Max's Spas came to the rescue. Amongst it was a short ground strap that had a crimp terminal on both ends. Unfortunately, only one of them was the right size, so I had to remove one and uncrimp a new one on the other end. For the second ground strap made, I then just had to connect it to the earth clamp on the battery and then to an earth point on the bodywork that was conveniently left over for when this body shelf might have become a Civic.
Right, that's the earth side done, so now onto the positive. And I'm going to start with the longest cable run, which is from the switch to the positive terminal on the fuse block here. Now, once again, my friend Max comes to the rescue, or rather his Spas does, and it comes with this quite long length of red battery cable. What's really good is that it even has the correct terminals on the end for both the kill switch and the fuse panel. This may be too long at the minute, but I'm not going to bother shortening it because we don't know the final position of that switch, so a little bit of extra cable helps. Anything I do cut off it, to be honest, is of no use elsewhere anyway, and it's just creating me work. So I'm going to bolt this to the fuse panel and then find a route to get this through the bulkhead and to the switch in the car. Now, either Rover or Honda, I'm not sure which one, left us this very nice blanking plug in the bulkhead. The rules for our racing governing body actually says all holes in the bulkhead must be plugged with either a steel plate or with suitable fitting grommets, and fortunately we have the factory one that fits very well. I'm guessing this is here because it's probably a leftover from when this car could have potentially become a Honda Civic rather than a Rover 400. Either way, it's very convenient for me, so all I need to do is punch a hole through this, feed it over the battery cable, and I can run this to the kill switch.
To punch a hole through the grommet, I used one of my small punches that I typically use when making cardboard templates. With the cable ran, I got a bit distracted and did another small wiring job that needed to be done.
Now, part of our racing involves us racing at night and will also require a driver change, and you at this point can probably figure out what we're up to. Anyway, I've been lurking around on the forums to our race body, and they basically recommend that we should keep an interior light to aid with driver changes and obviously pit crew if they have to access the car. In the previous episode, you would have seen me remove the light. Fortunately, I have kept it, I haven't yet sold it. I did, however, very unceremoniously rip out the wiring, which I am going to have to put back in. So the first job is to strip that loom and basically replace a lot of these broken clips.
The loom had a few extra wires in it that were no longer needed, so my first job was to strip the loom down and remove them. Now, I'm not a fan of leaving excess wires and looms for a few reasons. One, those additional wires can cause short circuits, posing a potential fire risk. 2, they make fault finding harder as you've got more wires to check through, and especially as you don't have an interior fitted, 3, hiding those extra connectors just looks untidy. With the loom stripped and with some replacement clips found, I got it and the interior light refitted. With that job done, I could then return to the job of wiring a kill switch. Returning to the wiring of the kill switch, the next job was to run the cable from the kill switch back to the battery. Unfortunately, I didn't have a long enough length of cable to do this in one go, so I used the longest length I had, which was again from the setup that the previous owner had installed in my friend's Peddlers pass, and added a 70 amp inline fuse at the end of it. This gave the circuit some added protection and made the joining of two cables quite easy.
This is the original cable that ran from the starter motor to the battery. However, because we've moved the battery, it's now too short. This bit then went from the battery to the fuse panel. However, if we fit this as it is, what it would do is actually bypass the safety switch that we fit to the car, so that's of no use. Now, I don't really want to be putting loads of joints in cables, but this gauge cable isn't cheap and I am on a budget, plus as I have so many offcuts that I'm never going to use on anything else, I'd rather use them up rather than buy a new cable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this cable from this terminal, use this and this length of cable to connect up with the fuse link that we put in earlier, and then extend this with a crimp connector to bolt into that nut.
With the starter motor cable removed, I then removed the loom tube from the other one, as this would not be required for when it was passed through the bulkhead into the passenger compartment. As you can see, it put up a bit of a fight. To finish it off, I added some heat shrink over the now exposed part of the ring terminals. As well as removing the starter motor cables from the battery positive clamp, I also had to extend the starter motor cable. I started this by enlarging the hole in a crimp terminal on an existing piece of cable. I then cut the crimp terminal off the other end and joined it into the existing starter motor cable using a new cut down crimp connector. You might also wonder why did I cut the starter motor cable off the battery clamp when I was just going to extend it. The reason for this is that the terminal on the end that connected to the starter motor was of a unique design and not one that I had that I could crimp on. The other end, however, I could just crimp on a normal style ring connector and bolt it onto the battery terminal. this cable will be entirely in the engine bay and ran alongside the engine, I decided to add some loom tube to help protect it. For the starter motor wiring modified, I began refitting it to the car. It really helps if you don't drop the nut from the battery terminal. For the battery terminal nut found, I then tried to fit a used battery terminal cover that I had. I will explain why in a bit, but unfortunately my first attempt wasn't successful.
It turns out that this little plastic cover does not fit over the battery terminal that's already on the Rover. And this is off a Nissan Micra, and basically due to its design, this little clip needs to go onto part of the metal battery terminal. I do, however, have this one, which is also from a Nissan Micra. I ordered a fuse box for another project ages ago, and I got this piece of cable with it. Why and if someone cut it, I don't know. It's one bolt to get it off. But what I'm going to do is cut this cable off this terminal so that this will fit. I can then put the start motor cable bolted onto the other side, and then I'm going to have to crimp a ring terminal onto the wire that's on the Rover and cut that one off the battery terminal that is already on the end of it. Cars turning a 5-minute job into a complete and utter fiasco. Anyway, like we said, let's get this cut off and get this lot joined together. By the way, before anybody else says that this seems like an awful lot of work, as per the rules or the technical spec that we have to follow, all positive battery terminals must be covered. That includes ones on the back of the kill switch, and duct tape is not sufficient. It actually says that. I carried on working late last night and finished wiring up the car. I was hoping to come back today and basically just show you it all working. I will admit I tested the kill switch last night, and I'm glad I did, because it didn't work, which kind of defeats the point of a kill switch. I started the engine up, I flicked the red switch, and it just kept running. Now, I've gone back and basically sort of wiring diagrams and had a look through the car and got the multimeter, and I've realised my mistake. Namely, where this wire connects to. Now, I never actually really bothered to check the wiring color on this. I assumed that this was a cable that was distributing power to the fuse box somewhere else in the car and electronics. What this actually is a cable from the alternator. That meant that as long as the engine was running, it was sending 12 volts to the fuse block, regardless of whether I hit the isolator switch and killed the power to it from the battery. The fuse block obviously powered, and it was 12 volts going to the rest of the car, which meant it was 12 volts going to the cycle. The alternator, which meant it was producing 12 volts, which meant it was feeding the fuse block, and I think you can probably see the vicious cycle we got into there. Now, this is exactly why it says in our technical specifications that it must kill the power to the car, and you need to wire it in such a way so that when you hit the switch, it dies. The solution to this then is this gets wired straight back to the battery, and the reason for wiring this directly back to the battery, which means any inertia that's left in the alternator, kind of as the engine slows down after you hit the kill switch, this last little bit of 12 volts it will produce will go straight to the battery, not into other circuitry in the car, potentially blowing up ECUs, sensors, etc. So, let's get this connected to the battery, and then let's test this kill switch again.
Yet again I dropped the nut of the battery terminal. You would have thought I'd learned to be more careful after the first time.
Right, I've got an ignition key, a big red kill switch key, and hopefully a Rover 400 that's wired correctly now. So let's test this. First of all, I'm going to test it without this, just to make sure that that didn't. So, no lights on the dash, no start, sign. Key in. That's a good sign that we've got the interior light on, so that means the car's got power. First notch, that's got lights on the dash. That's the car starting. Now the actual test that we have to pass in scrutineering, this car has to get to 3,500 RPM and then you have to hit the kill switch. So let's try it. I call that successful. Now, while that's all the mandatory wiring that we have to do to get through scrutineering, there is still a few more jobs that need to be done to get this car race ready.
And they're going to have to wait until the next episode, as this one's gone on a bit long. If you enjoyed this episode, then please hit the like button and share, it really does help out the channel. If you want to stay up to date on this build, then please hit that subscribe button and remember to turn on notifications. And finally, if you want to see more episodes in this build series, then please click the link that should be on screen now. Once again, thanks for watching.